have the May outfit for my calendar girl here, all ready to swap her into it. Isn't that so darling? It looks sort of like Cinco de Mayo and summery, but we are going to leave it on this gorgeous yellow gown for a moment so that I can tell you about my Alcott April reads. So we were celebrating Louisa May Alcott this past month in April with a readathon. Thank you so much to Tiffany for inviting me to co-host it. The other co-hosts and I did do a really fun live stream discussion of our group read, The Inheritance. So I'll make sure I leave that linked down in the description below if you want to watch it. Actually, all of us gave a little highlight reel of the different books that we've been reading for Alcott April. So if you're interested, make sure you go and check that out. To give you a quick Cliff Notes, we were not super impressed by The Inheritance. This is one of those books that you read it because Louisa May Alcott wrote it, when she was 17. The book itself is not really up to her future standard. It is very sentimental, and I do feel Louisa May Alcott's later works, even Little Women and Eight Cousins, which I'm about to tell you about, but even those can be kind of sentimental at times, but that sentiment is always tempered by humor and like a little bit of a hard edge, whereas in The Inheritance, it's just all sort of high sentiment. We agreed in the live stream that actually we prefer the movie, the film adaptation, because they inject a little bit of humor into that. When I first watched the film adaptation, I thought the writing, they must have changed it from Louisa May Alcott's writing because it was so sort of smarmy, but it turns out they didn't change the writing, but they did actually improve it a little bit with some humor. It was still fun to check out. I had thought that this book was the book that's kind of referenced in Little Women, because in Little Women, one of the heroines, Jo March, writes a book, a novel. And I had read that The Inheritance was sort of the book she had in mind, because of course Jo March is based on Louisa May Alcott herself. It turns out it's actually a book called Moods, which I guess I'm not really inclined to read after reading The Inheritance. When Louisa May Alcott hit her stride, which I think she does in Little Women and in Eight Cousins, she really just shines. But it's funny reading some of her other short stories, like sometimes they come off as overly flowery. And of course, I think she also wrote very sensational short stories, which I don't think those would be much my cup of tea, so I haven't even read any of those. I did read some of the flower fables, and similar to The Inheritance, they were very sweet, and they were fun for spring, but they were a little too sweet, a little saccharine. In one of the flower fables, they're trying to like convert the Frost King, like these, springtime fairies, and in the end they do, and like there's no more frost. But as a gardener, I can tell you that actually some plants need a little frost in order to, spur them on to growth. In gardening and in writing, you need that hard edge to juxtapose against the sweet scenes. This book here is the posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club by Charles Dickens. In Little Women, the sisters have a meeting of their own of the Pickwick Club, and they call themselves the names of the Pickwick Club characters. So it was fun to dip into this. I do actually want to finish it. I didn't get very far. It's basically a very ordinary group of men who just sort of take everything super, super seriously. And so there's a really funny contrast between just their quotidian adventures and their sort of high-flown language. I liked this passage. That punctual servant of all work, the sun, had just risen and began to strike a light on the morning of the 13th of May, 1827, when Mr. Samuel Pickwick burst like another sun from his slumbers, threw open his chamber window, and looked out upon the world below. Goswell Street was at his feet. Goswell Street was on his right hand, as far as the eye could reach. Goswell Street extended on his left, and the opposite side of Goswell Street was over the way. Such, thought Mr. Pickwick, are the narrow views of the philosophers, who, content with examining the things that lie before them, look not to the truths that are hidden beyond. As well might I be content to gaze on Goswell Street forever, without one effort, to penetrate to the hidden countries which on every side surround it. And having given vent to this beautiful reflection, Mr. Pickwick proceeded to put himself into his clothes, and his clothes into his portmanteau. So he's going on a journey. I need to make more progress in this. I am only a couple chapters in, but one of the challenges of the readathon was to read a book referenced in Little Women. So it was fun to have that spur to finally at least make a start on this. Another challenge was to read a nonfiction work about Louisa May Alcott and her time period. This one was recommended by one of you guys. It's called American Bloomsbury, Louisa May Alcott, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Henry David Thoreau, Their Lives, Their Loves, and Their Work by Susan Cheever. We mentioned this in the live stream. It's definitely not perfect. If you look at it as just a sort of gossipy conversation with this author about some facts, some light facts about, this circle of American writers in Concord, Massachusetts, where Louisa May Alcott grew up. Then you will enjoy it. I think because it's dealing with so many different sort of main characters, as it were, that the writing is a little disjointed. And also it's supposed to be nonfiction, but it feels very fictional. It feels sort of fan fiction-y. But yeah, I just kind of skimmed through it, and it was interesting. I feel like I learned a couple things I didn't know. I didn't realize that Thoreau was a school teacher, and Louisa May Alcott would have been in his class. Just so interesting to see the connections between these writers, and to think of them as just humans, neighbors getting into arguments. I think to get a really insightful glimpse into all of these authors' lives, you would probably need to stop and find a biography for each one individually. This one definitely had its flaws, but it was a fun taster for Alcott April of all of the action going on in Concord at the time. And my favorite two reads from Alcott April have been Eight Cousins and Rose in Bloom. If you love Little Women and you have never read these two, you definitely need to go and check them out. So Eight Cousins is about young Rose Campbell, and she is an orphan, but she has come into a large fortune, and she has a large family. They call it Ant Hill, where all the Campbells live, because there are like 6 aunts all living in the same town. But they're all delightful. Many of them have young boys growing up. So Rose's 7 cousins are all young boys, and she has grown up by herself. Like, she doesn't, she's never played with little boys a lot, so it's a little bit of an adjustment for her. But the same sweet humor that you find in Little Women, you find in Eight Cousins. Even just the first paragraphs, I thought this was so cute. Rose sat all alone in the big best parlor, with her little handkerchief laid ready to catch the first tear, for she was thinking of her troubles, and a shower was expected. She had retired to this room as a good place in which to be miserable, for it was dark and still, full of ancient furniture, somber curtains, and hung all round with portraits of solemn old gentlemen in wigs, severe-nosed ladies in top-heavy caps, and staring children in little bob-tailed coats or short-waisted frocks. It was an excellent place for woe, and the fitful spring rain that pattered on the window pane seemed to sob, "Cry away, I'm with you." See, I love that. That to me is like the perfect mix of sentiment and like humor, like not taking itself too seriously and kind of laughing at the fact that Rose is stealing away to be miserable. But the characters are just so delightful and charming. Her uncle is also such an incredible role model and guardian, takes such good care of her and just kind of helping to guide her character growth. It's fun to read this and think of how Louisa May Alcott's own upbringing and maybe being in the circle of, say, Emerson and Thoreau would have inspired this, because her uncle comes back from a visit abroad and he kind of fits out her room with all of these exotic, furniture and furnishings from India, from China. And actually in Rose in Bloom, so I'm not quite all the way through this, but I was kind of skipping ahead a little bit and remembering that Thoreau and Emerson are mentioned in this. Thoreau in particular, one of the main characters, loves Thoreau's writing, and it's just so funny to think of her writing about Thoreau when she knew him so well. It's not like just an author writing about another author they never met or they didn't really know. She would have known Thoreau thoroughly. In fact, apparently in American Bloomsbury was claiming that, the teenage Louisa had like a huge crush on Thoreau and Emerson. So yes, really enjoying Eight Cousins and Rose in Bloom, and it was a very fun Alcott April. fast. We are moving right along through the month of May, so I should probably sit down and get my April reading wrap-up finished. In April, you know, things are still kind of hesitant in this like delicate shade of green, but then you get a couple warm days and it's like all the leaves just race ahead right into summer. So I feel like that's where we are right now. I'm trying to enjoy my wisteria for the brief moment that they bloom. I did remember this year to try an enfleurage. So enfleurage is a French method of perfuming. So basically distilling the fragrance out of flowers, and you basically put fresh flowers, and they're supposed to be really fresh. You're supposed to like pick them first thing in the morning when they've just opened, and so the scent's supposed to be the most potent, and you put them in oil and leave them for 24 hours, and then you take the petals out, the flowers out, and you put in fresh flowers. You're apparently supposed to do this 3 days in a row. I'm just finishing up now, so I need to like actually see if it worked, if the fragrance really got infused into the oil. I was working with lily of the valley and lilacs, and those I guess are both very delicate flowers where more chemical processes don't necessarily work as well, but the enfleurage is delicate enough that it might work, although this was my first time trying it. But it was fun. I wanted to do it last year, and I only remembered it when the flowers were fading, so there weren't enough fresh ones. But this year I thought of it when the first lily of the valley appeared, and I thought this year we're gonna just try the enfleurage just because it's a fun word to say. Isn't it kind of miraculous though, all of the things that our ancestors figured out? Like somebody said, these flowers smell amazing. How do I keep the smell? How do we make the smell last? And they figured it out. It's kind of extraordinary. It's been very exciting out in the garden to see my alliums coming along. I planted those bulbs last fall and they've been so beautiful this spring. I have my dahlia bulbs planted. When I brought them up from the basement, they were already like sprouting. They were like, put me in the ground. We're ready to get growing already. Anyway, to get to the books. This month I read Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis for my subscriber book club. This was so much fun, especially since I read Pilgrim's Progress, the famous work by John Bunyan last year. That actually would have been good for Alcott April because in Little Women, Christian and his adventures are referenced by the characters, and of course that's from Pilgrim's Progress. It's such a great allegorical work. I listened to the audiobook, which I found it easier to approach in some ways, listening versus reading. But having read that, Pilgrim's Regress was super, super fascinating because it is C.S. Lewis's retelling of Pilgrim's Progress from a more modern point of view. So sort of injecting all of the crazy philosophies and crazy schools of thought of his day, of the 20th century, into the allegorical style and the sort of world and landscape that John Bunyan was working with. And actually there are certain times in Pilgrim's Regress where he says, oh, this used to be called the Valley of Humiliation, or like he references different things from Pilgrim's Progress. So it's really fun to see how they overlap and to hear it told in a slightly more modern way. There were definitely things that were so relatable to today's world. There were also some things that were a little abstruse, a little difficult to follow. We were agreeing in our book club chat that actually it was very engaging and kept you reading, like you kept turning the pages, but there were a lot of things where you're like, oh, this is going right over my head. A lot of allusions to philosophers and different thinkers. And at the end, there was a sort of postscript that he wrote 10 years later where he admits that maybe he went a bit overboard referencing some things and like he would have used different words in different ways. But on the whole, I highlighted so many passages. I enjoyed this book so, so much. I feel like it's a sort of lesser known C.S. Lewis, but anytime I pick up C.S. Lewis, I just find so much richness, so much good sense. I don't want to spoil Pilgrim's Regress too much. So I'm trying to think which quotations we should read. This is from very early on, and it kind of sets the tone of like the quest that the character goes on. The main character, John, is very young, and he has a lot of very strict rules that have been imposed on him, but when he's kind of going out for a walk one day, he hears this beautiful sound, very sweet and very short, as if it were one plucking of a string or one note of a bell, and after it a full clear voice, and it sounded so high and strange that he thought it was far away, further than a star. The voice said, "Come." While he strained to grasp it, there came to him from beyond the wood a sweetness and a pang so piercing that instantly he forgot his father's house and his mother and the fear of the landlord and the burden of the rules. all the furniture of his mind was taken away. Isn't that such an interesting sentence? That he has this amazing vision. Even while he pictured these things, he knew with one part of his mind that they were not like the things he had seen. Nay, that what had befallen him was not seeing at all, but he was too young to heed the distinction, and too empty, now that the unbounded sweetness passed away, not to seize greedily whatever it had left behind. He had no inclination yet to go into the wood, and presently he went home with a sad excitement upon him, repeating to himself 1,000 times, "I know now what I want." The first time that he said it, he was aware that it was not entirely true, but before he went to bed, he was believing it. I just love the variations and the delineations that Lewis draws in his themes right there, and he continues to dwell on that throughout the book, because John, the main character, is really seeking that sweetness, and that memory of it is what drives him on. I love how that sort of creative call that we all hear is really present in this book, and how sometimes you hear it and then you don't hear it for a long time, and sometimes you hear it and you think you know where it is, but then you hear it from another place, but you're too distracted by the first vision to like attend to the second vision. I just love the way Lewis plays with that idea, and just he weaves in so many casual, asides. Here's some other lines I highlighted. If you make the same guess often enough, it ceases to be a guess and becomes a scientific fact. When he met reason, that was such a great moment. And Mother Kirk was such an amazing character. Lewis kind of retells the story of Adam and Eve, or rather he weaves it into like the history of this country. But I love the way he builds it up, because it's not just that, Eve bit the apple. It's that Adam and Eve wanted to plant more apple trees. Mother Kirk tells him this story. So many things happened after the eating of the apple. For one thing, the taste created such a craving in the man and the woman that they thought they could never eat enough of it, and they were not content with all the wild apple trees, but planted more and more and grafted mountain apple onto every other kind of tree, so that every fruit should have a dash of that taste in it. They succeeded so well that the whole vegetable system of the country is now infected, and there is hardly a fruit or a root in the land, certainly none this side of the canyon, that has not a little mountain apple in it. You have never tasted anything that was quite free from it. That kind of comes back around to the rules that this character was taught growing up, but found to be very stifling. And Mother Kirk says, in a country where all the food is more or less poisoned, but some of it very much less than more, you need very complicated rules indeed to keep healthy. That plays into the idea that, we're all sinful creatures, and nothing we do is perfect. Nothing we ever can do is perfect. But we can keep our eyes open and look for the food that is less poisoned rather than the food that is more poisoned. Maybe I'll save another quotation for my Substack reading wrap up, bookishprincess.substack.com, if you want to hear more about the books I've been reading this month. Make sure you pop over there and check that out. So that was our April book club pick. Our May book club pick is going to be Pat of Silverbush by Ella Montgomery. Always lovely to get some Ella Montgomery reading in. I have not read this one yet. I've heard some kind of mixed things. I know some people like it, some people didn't care for it too much, but I'm excited to meet another of Ella Montgomery's charming heroines, and there's a cat on the cover. You can't really go wrong with that. The book club, in case you're not familiar with it, I run a book club for subscribers. We meet once a month on Google Meet. We also chat sometimes in my Discord group, so if you want to join and have not yet, you can just send me an email, emma@bookishprincess.com, and I will add you to the email list. That's where we send out the book club Google Meet link every month. Shout out to Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, who told me about Pilgrim's Regress by C.S. Lewis. I don't think I'd ever heard of it. I had no idea it existed, but I just enjoyed it so much. Christy and I have been talking about reading Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson, and I did actually grab the audiobook, so I've been slowly listening to it. It is fairly similar to many of his other ideas, Jordan Peterson's ideas that he's talked about in many other podcasts, but this is a sort of earlier iteration and a different sort of configuration, and it's been really interesting to listen to. Maps of Meaning delves into the idea that, many people look at the world these days through a scientific lens. They look at it as a world of facts, a world of objects that can be scientifically defined. However, what they're forgetting is that the world is also very much a world of action. actions, and all of those actions have meaning, but that meaning shifts and is dependent on context and circumstances. And as humans, we can't divorce ourselves from that meaning, like, because we're creatures of action. Like, that way of looking at the world has kind of been pushed to the side, and everyone wants to talk about the scientific way of looking at the world, but that meaning lens is so, so critical. And I love how Jordan Peterson points out that, our ancestors really understood that lens of looking at the world, that the world is a world of meaning, and they had all of these traditions and wisdom and ways that they grappled with the meaning of the world. And so it's really not very clever when modern thinkers and modern people kind of act like, oh, we can just dispense with the meaning. Like, if you look at your own life and the way you live your own life, you have not dispensed with the meaning. We can't dispense with the meaning. I'm a Roman Catholic, and my faith is very much, the core of who I am. Jordan Peterson's wife, Tammy Peterson, she has an amazing podcast. I love her podcast. But she recently converted to Catholicism, and I feel like, honestly, Jordan Peterson is like right behind her. I feel like he's gonna convert too. But it's so interesting to hear him talk about things, because he's coming at like the idea of meaning from a sort of secular and skeptical point of view, a very psychological point of view, and yet he's coming around to the same conclusions as a person of faith. And it's just very interesting to see that kind of different perspective, but just, reaching the same truths, which is not surprising, because we all live in the same world. We all live in God's world. And all paths lead back to God, which, see, I don't want to give any spoilers for Pilgrim's Regress, but Pilgrim's Regress, guys, it was so good. Speaking of faith, I have a couple books here by some popes that I thought I'd tell you guys about. It's Jesus of Nazareth by Pope Benedict XVI. I think this was a series, possibly, and this is the second one. In this bold, momentous work, the Pope, in his first book written as Benedict XVI, seeks to salvage the person of Jesus from recent popular depictions and to restore Jesus' true identity as discovered in the Gospels. This says from the baptism in the Jordan to the Transfiguration. So yeah, I think there are multiple parts to this series, but I'm hoping to start that soon. And then I did, a while ago, decide to purchase these two books, which are John Paul II, Karol Wojtyla, A Theology of the Body and Love and Responsibility. They are very dense, and so I've been making my way through them very, very slowly, just like a little bit every day in bite-sized chunks. But there was a podcast I was listening to that was talking about how in the 60s, John Paul II saw all these cultural changes and shifts coming down the pike. And he realized that young people of future generations, we're gonna need like a guide. We're gonna need someone to like help them out with how messed up the world was getting. And yeah, you look around the world and it feels like things are pretty topsy-turvy, but it was just so fun to hear in that podcast that John Paul II was writing for the future. He was like, things are gonna get worse and people are gonna need some solid wisdom. He is so scholarly. The way he quotes Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle and all of these different thinkers and saints is so inspiring. I don't know why it took me this long to really sit down with John Paul II. Anyway, we'll see if I can like finish one of these by the end of the year. That's my goal. That's my timeline. Well, that's about it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this spring vlog. I'd love to hear what you've been up to, gardening, reading, fun adventures down in the comments below. I really enjoyed editing my DC video, and it just made me realize I have some other travel videos that I have not edited yet. Like I went to New York City last summer and I got up the bookshops video, but I have a couple other videos that I just have not had time to get to. So hopefully, we're gonna see if I can get to another travel video sometime soon. But I hope you're all having a wonderful spring, wonderful month of May. Until next time, stay bookish, friends. Bye.